Ashes of innocence. The twin moons of Novygrad hung low in the sky, casting a pale glow over the human colony. It had been a quiet night before the warships arrived, before the screaming started. The Galactic Empire had come with fire and steel, and the Draskari, their reptilian enforcers, carried out their orders without hesitation. The humans of Novygrad were given no chance to surrender. The Empire saw them as an infestation, a race that might one day pose a threat. And so, they enacted their brutal decree. They slaughtered everyone. Yelena Petrovna crouched in the ruins of what had once been her home, her hands bound behind her back. The acrid stench of burning flesh filled her lungs, but she did not cough. She did not cry. She had learned long ago that grief could wait. Her daughter, Anna, and her son, Theo, were dead. They had been pulled from her arms, dragged to the square where the other children were gathered. The Draskari commander, a towering brute clad in dark armor, had declared the execution necessary. He spoke of security, of ensuring the colony would never rise again. But Yelena knew the truth. The Empire did not care for security. It only cared for power. The children had been forced to their knees. Some had cried, others had pleaded. Little Anna had turned to her mother with wide, uncomprehending eyes. "Mama," she had whispered. Then the flames had come. Yelena did not remember screaming. She did not remember struggling against the soldiers who held her down. All she remembered was the smell of burning hair, the sound of Theo's tiny voice crying for her, the way the fire swallowed them whole. And then silence. Now, she knelt in the ashes of her life, the cold metal cuffs biting into her wrists. The Draskari had not killed her. Perhaps they thought it was a kindness. More likely, they thought it was punishment, leaving her alive to bear witness to her failure. Fools! She raised her head slowly, her dark eyes locking onto the commander who had given the order. He stood near the wreckage of the colony's central hall, barking orders to his troops. The flames illuminated the jagged scars that ran across his scaled face. Yelena memorized every detail. The way he stood, his weight slightly shifted to his right leg, an old wound, maybe. The way his soldiers flinched when he snapped at them, suggesting he was feared but not loved. The way he kept his blaster holstered at his left hip, despite being right-handed. All of it mattered, because she would kill him. She would kill all of them. A soldier approached her, his clawed hand gripping her arm. "Move," he growled in broken standard. "Prisoner transport soon." Yelena complied, rising to her feet. She had spent years learning patience, perfecting the art of waiting for the right moment. She let them see a broken woman. She let them believe she was nothing but a grieving mother. They did not know her. Once, before she had come to this colony, before she had become a mother, she had been something else. Something the Empire had whispered about in dark corners. Something even their best assassins feared. Baba Yaga. She had buried that part of herself when Anna was born. She had sworn never to return to the old ways, to the life of blood and shadows. But they had taken everything from her. And so, she would take everything from them. The soldier yanked her forward, pushing her toward the remaining prisoners, those who had not yet been executed. Yelena stumbled, deliberately making herself appear weak. The guard scoffed. He never saw the movement. A flick of the wrist, a shift in balance, a hidden blade, thin as a needle, coated in poison, slipped free from its sheath inside her sleeve. The guard stiffened. His claws twitched. Then he collapsed, the toxin already shutting down his nervous system. No one noticed. Not yet. Yelena turned and melted into the shadows of the ruined colony. She had work to do. The Baba Yaga rises. The first soldier died without a sound. Yelena dragged his body into the shadows, pressing 2 fingers to his throat to confirm what she already knew. Dead. A clean kill. Efficient. No wasted movement. She knelt beside him, stripping away his utility belt and taking the plasma knife from his holster. The weapon was crude, nothing like the tool she had once wielded, but it would do. She wiped the blood from her hidden blade and slid it back into the sheath inside her sleeve. The hunt had begun. She had no illusions about survival. There were at least 200 Draskari soldiers on Novygrad, maybe more. They had slaughtered the colony in a matter of hours, but they had made a fatal mistake. They had let her live. She moved through the ruins, her body low to the ground, scanning for patrols. The Draskari weren't used to stealth. They were conquerors, brutes who crushed resistance with overwhelming force. But they had never faced someone like her before. A whisper of movement ahead. Two soldiers speaking in their guttural tongue. Yelena recognized the cadence, relaxed, careless. They didn't expect trouble. They would learn. She stepped forward, letting her foot drag against the rubble just enough to make a sound. One of the Draskari turned, his reptilian eyes narrowing. He raised his blaster. Too slow. Yelena lunged, the plasma knife flashing in the moonlight. She struck his throat, twisting the blade to sever the artery. He gargled a cry as she wrenched the weapon free. The second soldier shouted, fumbling for his comm unit. Yelena was already on him. She spun low, sweeping his legs out from under him. He crashed to the ground, his blaster clattering against the stone. She planted a knee on his chest and drove the plasma knife into his eye. Silence. Yelena exhaled slowly, wiping her blade against her sleeve. It had been years since she had killed, years since she had been this. But it came back to her with frightening ease. She stood, surveying the battlefield. Blood pooled beneath the bodies. She did not look away. She had no time for remorse. A memory surfaced. Anna's voice. Mama, tell me a story. Tell me about Baba Yaga. The old tales. The Witch of the Woods. The nightmare that lurked in the shadows. She had never told Anna the truth. That Baba Yaga was real. That she had worn the name like a second skin. Now, she would wear it again. A flicker of movement in the distance. More soldiers. Yelena vanished into the ruins. By the time the Draskari realized something was wrong, it was too late. Patrols went missing. Comms were filled with static, broken only by whispers in a language none of them understood. Shadows moved where no one should be. The fear spread quickly. At first, the commanders dismissed the disappearances as accidents. A lost patrol. A few undisciplined soldiers wandering off. But then they found the first body, or rather what was left of it, impaled on a broken metal beam, its armor stripped away, the eyes gouged out, a symbol carved into its chest, an ancient mark, meaningless to the Draskari but burned into Yelena's memory. A warning. The whispers started that night. Soldiers reported hearing a woman's voice on their comms, speaking in hushed, lilting tones. Some said it was standard, others swore it was something older, something wrong. One of them, young, inexperienced, claimed he saw her standing in the ruins, watching them with eyes like fire. The commander struck him down for spreading fear. But he did not sleep that night. Yelena watched from the shadows, listening to the panic spread. Good. She had learned long ago that fear was a weapon. The Draskari were stronger, better armed, and utterly ruthless. But they had one weakness. They did not understand what lurked in the dark. She moved silently, her body blending into the ruins. The soldiers were nervous now, their movements clumsy. They clustered together, seeking safety in numbers. It would not save them. Yelena smiled. She had no army, no advanced weapons, no warships, but she had something far worse. She had vengeance, and she had time. The Empire trembles. The Draskari patrol moved in tight formation, their rifles raised, eyes darting through the ruins of Novygrad. Their commander, Varik, had fought in over a dozen campaigns. He had razed colonies, crushed rebellions, and seen entire species kneel before the might of the Galactic Empire. But this was different. This was wrong. They had expected a resistance force. Perhaps survivors armed with crude weapons, desperate and foolish enough to fight back. But what they faced now was not a rebellion. It was a hunt. Varric's clawed fingers tightened around his rifle as he scanned the flickering firelight. His unit was down to 5 soldiers. There had been 10 of them when they started their sweep. No gunfire, no alarms, no sounds of struggle, just silence. Then came the whispers, a voice drifting through their comms. Soft, lilting, human. You came to my world and took my children. Varric's pulse pounded. Cut that transmission, he snarled. One of his soldiers frantically pressed buttons on his wrist console. "Commander, it's—" A strangled sound. Varric turned just in time to see the soldier vanish into the darkness, yanked backward as if by an unseen force. The others spun, rifles raised, but there was nothing to shoot. Nothing but shadows. A scream tore through the night. The Draskari fired wildly, bright bolts of plasma lighting up the ruins. They hit nothing. The night swallowed their bullets as easily as it swallowed their fear. Then something moved. Varric barely had time to register the figure darting toward them before the first blade cut through flesh. The soldier closest to him gurgled, clutching his throat as dark blood gushed between his fingers. Another fell, his rifle spinning through the air. A shadow danced between them, a blur of speed and violence. Then Varric saw her, a human woman, clad in the torn remnants of a colonial jumpsuit, her hair wild, her eyes burning with something he had never seen before. Something ancient, something hungry. She moved like death itself, her blade flashing in the firelight. Another soldier screamed, his body twisting as she cut him down. Varric roared and raised his rifle. Too slow. A flash of movement. She was already behind him. A whisper in his ear. Boo. Pain exploded through his body. He dropped to his knees, clutching his side. Blood seeped through his armor. He gasped for breath, but his lungs refused to cooperate. Boots crunched on broken stone as she stepped in front of him. She was smaller than he expected. Lean, human, fragile, but the bodies around them told another story. Varric tried to speak, but all that came out was a wet gurgle. The woman knelt, tilting her head. You don't understand what you've done, do you? He bared his teeth. You are nothing. She smiled. A slow, cold thing. Once maybe, she grabbed his comm unit from his belt and pressed it to her lips. This is Yelena Petrovna, the Baba Yaga. I am the last mother of Novygrad, and I am coming for all of you. She crushed the device in her fist. Varric's eyes widened in horror. Not because of her words, but because of what they meant. The Empire would hear them. The entire galaxy would hear them. The Draskari had spent years waging war on species that had no legends. No monsters. No myths. They had just given birth to one. And she was real. The last thing Varric saw was her blade flashing down toward his throat. An empire burns. The warships arrived in force. The Imperial Fist, a battlecruiser the size of a city, loomed in Novygrad's sky, its hull bristling with cannons. Dropships rained from its belly, disgorging legions of Draskari shock troopers onto the ruined colony. They did not come to conquer. They came to exterminate. Yelena watched from the shadows, perched atop the skeletal remains of a collapsed building. Her hands rested lightly on her knees, her breath slow and steady. Below, soldiers spread through the streets in tight formations, their rifles sweeping every corner. They were afraid. Even with their numbers, their weapons, their warships blotting out the sky, they were afraid. She smiled. They should be. She reached for the detonator on her belt. A simple device, no bigger than her palm. A single press, and the battlefield would change. She clicked it. The ground erupted. Fire and shrapnel burst through the streets, swallowing entire squads in an instant. The ruins of Novygrad had been her home. Now they were her trap. Panicked voices filled the air. We're under attack. Multiple explosions. Who's firing? Whose? Another explosion. Then another. Smoke and fire devoured the sky. Then the screaming started. Not from the explosions. From her. She moved through the chaos like a specter, striking from the smoke. A knife to the throat. A bullet to the skull. A tripwire sending a soldier sprawling before her boot crushed his windpipe. One by one, they fell. The commanders tried to rally. Fall back. Regroup at the... A shot rang out. His head snapped back, and he crumpled. They had no rallying point. No formation. No hope. Deep in the heart of the battlefield, General Vorkith, the Empire's most feared warrior, strode through the flames. Towering, clad in obsidian black armor, he had crushed rebellions on a dozen worlds. He had personally slaughtered the leaders of the Terek uprising, breaking their skulls with his bare hands. And yet, his claws trembled as he scanned the ruins. This was not war. This was a curse. A haunting. "Show yourself, human," he growled, voice reverberating through his helmet. "Face me with honor." Silence. Then, a whisper in his calms. "Honor." A sharp, humorless laugh. "You slaughtered my children. Do you think you deserve honor?" Vorkutha's grip tightened on his war axe. He turned slowly, his breath coming hard and fast. Movement. The flicker of a shadow. He lunged, too late. A blade sank into his side, slipping through the gap in his armor. He roared, swinging blindly, but she was already gone. Pain lanced through his body. Poison. He staggered. "I have walked in the dark," the voice whispered in his ear. "I have buried my name, my past, my mercy." A second blade struck, this time at his knee. His leg buckled. Vorkuth snarled. "Face me, coward." A final whisper. Right behind him. "I already have." The blade punched through the back of his helmet, straight into his skull. The Empire's greatest warrior crumpled, dead before he hit the ground. The battle was over. The slaughter had begun. Hours later, when the Imperial Fist received its final transmission, the bridge fell silent. The ship's captain, a hardened veteran, felt a chill creep down his spine as he watched the footage. A single human figure, standing amid the corpses of an entire battalion. Blood soaked her clothing, her skin. Her eyes burned. She raised her head, looking directly into the recording drone. She spoke. "You came to my world and took my children." She stepped forward, slow, deliberate. "Now, I come to yours." The transmission cut to black. A tremor passed through the bridge. The crew of the Imperial Fist had spent their lives bringing terror to the galaxy. But now, for the first time, they knew fear.